What is up? I'm Marcel and welcome to The Modern Filmmaker. Today we are talking about exposure and how you can enhance and manipulate it in Davinci Resolve 16. So we are in Davinci Resolve 16 and I've got a few clips here that I'm going to go over. And the first thing I'm going to go over is this underexposed shot right here, because that is probably the most common issue with exposure is underexposure, because we all know cameras can never use enough light, it seems like. And the first indicator of underexposed footage is everything is pushed towards the shadows. I mean, as well as you can obviously see that this shot is very dark. If you need that secondary proof, look over at the scopes and you will see everything is pushed towards the shadows. And everything's not just pushed towards the shadows, but it's kind of like smudged into the shadows. And that is the real crime that happens when you underexpose. Because if you look here, you can see that we are missing a lot of hair. Her hair is just a black mess of muddy noise. And if I try to come down to the curves and pull these shadows up to regain that hair, we're getting a little jawline back, getting some cheekbone back, a little neck, but no hair. Plus, we're getting a lot of noise, which is always an issue. So those are the two things, if you don't know, now you know, you got to look out for when dealing with underexposed footage. A loss of information completely, and then a large amount of noise in the information that is there in the shadows. And this whole shot was pretty much in the shadows, which means everything I would want you to look at as the videographer or editor is going to be covered in noise. So what I would personally do is I would bring this up a little bit, but not too much, because, you know, an amateur move that you see made a lot is people try to take dark footage and make it bright. And, you know, I understand sometimes you're in a situation where the rest of the scene is really bright and the rest of the shots were shot perfectly. So you've got to match this one shot to the rest. But if you don't have to, do not push the footage too far, because if I push this way up here and try to make this a bright shot, it's just becomes science at that point, guys. I mean, this shouldn't be this bright if the shadows are so dark that I can't see anything over here. And it just starts to look like that's not right. That's not right. And a part of good or well exposed footage is that film look that it gives you. When the stars align and you've got good clarity in your highlights and you've got good clarity in your shadows, that is when people see it and they automatically think, oh, that's a good image. That's a professional image. That's the real freaking deal. I know you guys have heard that. I love that. The first time your friends see your work and they're like, oh my gosh, man, this is the real deal. That's when you know. That's when you know. You're like, oh, yes, I'm the real deal. So anyway, what I would do, I'm rambling now. I'd push these shadows up to, you know, a decent amount, but something that's still kind of dull. And then I'll make a new node. Boom. I'll click on somewhere on her face where I like the highlights, where I don't want them to be affected at all. Like her cheekbones here, I think the highlights there look really good. And you do that with the qualifier. It should automatically be on the qualifier, but if not, go over to this menu here and go to qualifier. And from there, click on the highlights, and then I'm going to pull the bottom of the curves to the right, giving us that contrast. And see, we made her bright enough to where you can see her beautiful face with her flawless skin and tasteful makeup, but it's not too bright to where you're going to question, like, well, why are those shadows so deep? You know, it's still, you know, it's nice, but it makes sense, if you know what I'm saying. And that's, as the colorist, that's kind of our job. I mean, as the editor, as the videographer, as the colorist, as the sound design guy, that's always our job to, you know, make it not distracting, to make it natural but beautiful, and to try to capitalize on the beauty while kind of trying to dilute the imperfections. And so the next thing I'm going to do to dilute the imperfection, right click this first node, and I'm going to go to add serial before, which will add a node before that one at the very beginning. And I'm just going to denoise, because you can see there's just tons of noise here. So if you have the studio version, you can come over to the motion effects, I like to use temporal noise reduction. It works really well, and it looks really, it doesn't overly smoothen things out. It doesn't overly do it, yeah, which it can, but it just happens to be, it just tends to be a little softer. So I'm gonna go to better here and then unlink these, because Luma is like your light noise, Chroma is like your color noise. So you're gonna have much more light noise than color noise in just about every situation. So even if I bump this Chroma up right now, I'm not even seeing a difference. So I'm gonna put that back down to 0. Move up this Luma noise. This is pretty bad, so I'm gonna go higher than I usually would, just to kind of prove a point. And I'll bump up this Chroma noise a little bit. And now we have a pretty good looking image. The only thing, our white balance is a little off. It's not even a color grading video, but I do want to show you guys how I would handle my underexposed footage. And so I'm gonna go to tint and just pushing a little more purplish, pinkish. And yeah, like that is just a beautiful shot right there, guys. That is just well captured, well executed. I'm loving it. All right, one last thing that I would do to this, which you guys have seen me do in other videos. I'm gonna go to the qualifier. I'll hit the highlight button so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm gonna bump up the, grab the lows, and I'm gonna drag these up until I just have the highlights, just like the little contours of her face here. The bridge of the nose, the cheekbones, a little bit of the chest here. Soften this, maybe a little more, and then denoise, because you can see all these little speckles here from the qualifier. Denoise, that'll smoothen those out enough. And then now I will bump up this gain in the primaries bars. Boom. Maybe a little gamma too. Maybe a little gamma. Yeah, that's dope. And maybe I'll take this mid-tone detail and just move this, zoom in. Maybe you guys can see what this does. I'm gonna move the mid-tone details down to the left. Kind of softens it out. You see, if I raise these, it kind of makes it more punchy. I kind of want to soften those highlights. So I'm gonna go down, maybe minus 20. Now it's softer, but it's still there. It's still beautiful, still punchy. The awesome Mary V is the model in this shot. Now we can see we've done some beautiful things. Oh my goodness. Look at that before, after, before, after. I would have thought this shot was unusable, maybe. I still would have used it. I mean, it's just a beautiful shot. So, to the next one. This is why we really always want to expose to the right. They say always expose to the right, expose to your highlights. Because as much as I want to be that guy that's like, hey, I've got this magic trick that'll make your underexposed footage look like gold. I mean, to be honest, we made this look a lot better, but it doesn't look like gold. I mean, this could have been, you know, you guys know 4K footage. I mean, even 1080 footage, like this could be much sharper around her eyes. And, you know, because it's underexposed and we had to do the noise reduction, it's got this softer look. So I may have saved it, but if I would have done it right from the beginning and shot it right, this shot would have been freaking phenomenal. It would have been such a beautiful shot that was so sharp. I mean, look at this bokeh here. The background's blown all out, and she was so sharp. But that's just, there is no magic trick. You just try to do your best to expose to the highlights. And this is a situation where I did expose the highlights pretty well. And it's a little blown out, but you can see that the dynamic range here is just huge. And the company that hired me was SteelFit, huge company. Shout out to SteelFit, love them. And there's some products they have here. And if I would have exposed to get any more of the clouds in the shot, I would have lost the product. I would have lost the label. I didn't have a light with me, so bada bing, bada boom. Had to do what I had to do. So in this shot, what I would generally do is just come over to the shadows. There's a shadow and highlight button right here, and this does things in a pretty unique way. it really kind of takes like the shadow midtones and pushes it towards the midtones. And then the highlight control kind of takes the shadow or the highlight midtones, kind of pushes them towards the midtones. Instead of, for instance, if I come to the curves and pull up the shadows, I'm pulling up the very bottom. You can see that in the scopes. And if I come over to the lift, I'm pulling from the very bottom. If I come to the gamma, at a certain point, it starts to pull from the bottom. So by using the shadow button or the shadow control, I can bring in just the shadows, and I'm not affecting the highlights or really the midtones that much. So it's a really smooth way to work with highlights and shadows. This doesn't always work well, and I'll show you why in the next clip. But as for this shot, that's what I would do. Excuse me. But as for this shot, that is what I would do. I would probably try to bring back some of these highlights, but at a certain point, guys, I mean, like I'm bringing back a little bit of information here. And if I were to, let's say, go back to 0, and let's try this in the curves, I can gain a little bit, but it's still going to look a little choppy out there. So maybe I'll regain that, and then boost this here, and Bob's your uncle. I mean, now this shot looks far better. The colors look cleaner. You can see a little bit of detail outside. I mean, honestly, I'll be honest. If this sign here was blown out at all, I would have probably just blown out the whole window. Because honestly, you have to kind of make an executive choice at some point in time. Like, is this not being blown out more of a distraction or less of a distraction? Is being blown out more of a distraction or less of a distraction? So because we have the whole sign in there and I was able to expose that sign, I'm going to keep this window kind of clean. But if we were losing a little bit of that sign, then I would probably give this window a whole glow and make it even brighter. Because at some point, there's no point in trying to save the outside when it could just become more of a distraction than anything else. But in this situation, I think it looks totally fine. There's some more stuff I could do to this shot, but this isn't a color grading video. It's an exposure video. So moving on, this next shot. Now this is like an example of a perfectly exposed shot. I mean, nothing's perfect, but this is just, you know, like I was saying earlier, when everything's exposed right and you got good detail in the highlights and you got good detail in the shadows, it looks way more film-esque. It just looks right. It looks like this shot is straight out of the camera, and it already looks like a freaking commercial for Matrix, this stair stepper machine. You know, it's a beautiful shot. Of course, you could play around with it. It could bring up some of these shadows, just brightening up the whole image in these shadows, which looks really nice. And then, let's see, maybe make a dot here at the bottom of the curves and pull these in a little bit. But actually, you know what I would do instead of this? I'd make one a little higher, pull these up and fade that a little bit, and pull these down. This is a cool little trick because it gives you that film fade kind of look, but it also gives you that hard contrast kind of look. And that's something I've been trying to kind of perfect a little more lately, is that film look but high contrast. If you can mesh those two together, oh my gosh, that is the money look right there. That you will make some money with that look. So that looks pretty good. I don't even know what else. There's several other things I could do, but honestly, I wanted to pull up this shot just so you guys could see what a well-exposed shot looks like, because a lot of this job, a lot of videography and editing is knowing what to look for. If you know what to look for in the beginning, like when I first started using cameras, God, I would shoot on and on and on and come back with footage and be like, what did I do? Why is it so dark? Why is this blown out? Why is this green? Why is this? Oh my gosh, because I didn't know what I was looking for. And when you know these little tiny things to look for in the camera, and you kind of know what you can do with the footage out of the camera, then it really just kind of helps you in the process of getting the footage in the best way that you can. Because once again, I mean, this is, I'm not trying to toot my own horn because I don't every shot of mine does not look like this, but this just looks straight out of a stinking Matrix commercial. It's like, need a treadmill? Buy Matrix. Need some nice thighs? Buy Matrix. You want to look like this chick on the screen? Buy. All right, I'll stop. So moving on to the next clip. This is where I wanted to kind of go over that highlight and shadow control down here on the bottom left. This is a really well exposed shot as well. This was shot with the GH4. Not the best quality, but it's still a pretty well exposed shot. It's in log. I'm going to right click on this last node and add a LUT. Let's just go for something generic like so. Do a quick little white balance, quick and dirty, and moving on. So in this situation, beautiful model, Whitney Weiser, IFBB Pro, Optimum Nutrition. Shout out to Whitney. She looks great, but it's just a little too dark. So in this situation, if I wanted to raise the shadows, already I'm seeing some weirdness. Like I said earlier, the shadow and highlight button, they kind of take a certain spectrum of the shadow or highlight, and it's kind of like a mid-range of the shadow. So it's like a low mid-range. It pushes it towards the mid-range. So the first thing I'm noticing is when you push this up, it kind of gives this weird mid-tone detail look. And in a lot of shots with the shadows and highlights, it kind of seems like it'd be really easy just to raise the shadows and then maybe just lower the highlights. But it's giving me this super weird mid-tone detail look. See that? It almost looks like stinking Mad Max or something. See, before it looks much softer. This does look like, you know, you brought some of the highlights up, or brought some of the highlights down and brought some of the shadows up, but this looks better. This looks softer. So in this situation, I would kind of re-expose. And you guys have seen me do this with the curves before, but I would use the curves because in the curve roll off, as you can see, when I pull up the shadows, it kind of pulls everything up to this point. So it kind of just pulls everything up in a nice, smooth fashion. Instead of just like taking a certain spectrum and being like, all right, let's just move this up here. It takes everything and says, hey guys, we're all kind of leaning this way. So let's all do that smoothly. Y'all get what I'm saying. So I would move this up and move this down a little bit to soften that out a little. And in the next node, I would do kind of that highlight thing I did in the first one. So choose a place where I like the highlights and the curves. It'll make a little dot there. And then pull this down. And now we have a little more information. If I control D, bring this up a little more. There we go. Yeah, now we have a little more brightness. Here, I'll just do this. There you go. A little more brightness, but we still have good contrast. It's like we kind of just re-exposed the shot. It's like we shifted the exposure a little bit. And I guess in theory, it seems like you could do that with the offset, but in my experience, I just don't want to raise the highlights either. That's why I kind of pulled the highlights down a little bit and raised the shadows. All right, so great shot. Love you, Whitney. Hope you're doing well. Next shot is this awesome shot. Now we're going hard on this one because there's a real big problem with this footage. It's a 3.5 minute interview, and the interviewer is completely in the shadows. And so in this one, we're going to be doing some relighting. This is log footage, so the first thing I'm going to do is add a LUT. All right, I'm all over the place. Get your life together, Marcel. And it looks good. The white balance was good. Generally, things are okay, but yeah. The host is just over here in the dark, and it looks like, why is this guy in the shade? You guys are inside. Why is somebody in the shade and somebody's not in the shade? What's happening here? So the first thing I'm going to do is make a parallel node, Alt-P, and do some relighting. You guys have seen me do relighting in like a kind of a creative styling kind of way. Hold on. Give me a second. I need some more energy. Okay, you guys have seen me do relighting in like a creative styling kind of way, but not like this. In the beginning of the shot, these Skittles were a bad idea. Now I can't talk. I'm gonna have to eat these Skittles now and continue this in a second. I'm an idiot. They look so good though. I'm just staring at them the whole time. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is go to the not the qualifier, but the power windows. I'm gonna click on this gradient power window, move this over here, hit the highlight button so we can see exactly what we're doing. I'm gonna move this towards Tyler here on the left. Simple. Boom. Love it. And then what I'm going to do is pull down the gamma a little bit. Maybe even the highlights a tad. So I'm going to go to the highlights here. Pull down a smidge, not much. I'm going to do most of the pulling down in the gamma. And maybe a little bit in the shadows. I'm just trying to get them closer to each other a little bit. And I'm starting with him. And now I'm going to go up to this other node that's in this parallel mixer, make another gradient power window, and do the exact opposite. I'm going to do the opposite direction, and then instead of lowering the highlights, what am I going to do? That's right, I'm going to raise the shadows. So we have power windowed this guy. I'm just going to raise these shadows, and voila. Now it looks like these guys are in the same place at the same time on the same day having the same conversation. I love it. And another thing that's cool about this technique in particular is in this situation, I'm not getting a ton of grain. And if I even make another node and do a little contrasting, the noise isn't really that bad, but if it was in a situation like this, I could add a little noise reduction just to this side, where we brought the shadows up. If there was excessive noise there, I could add a little noise reduction just to that side, and it would help a ton. Instead of, if I were to do this in the middle of a grade, or in the middle of the creative styling of the grade, then we got noise reduction on half the screen, and it would just look like a mess. If you do it this way, it'll come out looking a lot smoother, and no one will notice that you've got half the screen noise reduced and the other half more regular. Yeah, so that's it. I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys liked this, and if you did like it, please press the if you did like it, please press the like button. Just press it. I mean, if you liked it, then you might as well just press the like button. And if you didn't like it, press it anyway. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comment section down below. I always reply. And as always, once again, I am Marcel, and this has been The Modern Filmmaker, and I will see you on the next one. Peace!